So there have been a number of war games, right, where academics, NGO officials, government officials, it's all sort of this blob. It's kind of hard to disaggregate it, but have gamed out various election scenarios. And it sounds a little more to me like contingency planning than like an academic exercise. But tell me what you know about that.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. So you may have noticed in the news lately that there have been a lot of stories warning about AI deepfakes.
Yeah.
This is the new, if Russia was the excuse for getting involved in content moderation in 2020 or even 2018, AI and deepfakes are the new buzzword in Washington. And
I thought it was just a way to explain away your porn tapes.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I didn't make this. It's a deep fake. But this is something that somebody tipped me off to. Now, this is not like a secret. It's actually public, although nobody has brought it up. There is a website that's out there. But this is a game. It's basically Elections and Dragons. It's made by InQtel. You can see the IQT here, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. And it is a...
Wait, stop. Yeah. Why does the CIA have a venture arm?
Because to develop technologies that would otherwise probably be prohibited. And, because there's a lot of things that they get into that maybe are good money-making ideas. I mean, part of what being in the intelligence business is about is getting out and making money, right?
But that's kind of a problem if your intel agencies have venture arms.
Yes, right. You would think that would be a problem.
So this is a CIA-funded election game.
Yep, it's a CIA-funded election game, and just to start, just like Dungeons and Dragons, it has funny dice. This is a 10-sided die.
But for the record, are you making this up? Is this real?
This is real. This is real. Haywire is the name of the game. And if you roll the InQtel symbol, right? It says on
I'm laughing. This is so dark.
It says on the back, if you roll, it's basically the premise of the game is that you are trying to avoid a haywire situation, meaning an AI-induced disaster.
Where the voters get what they want.
Basically, yeah. So if you roll the InQtel logo, it says haywire averted. So basically, if you roll CIA, you win, right?
Now, the CIA venture logo looks a little bit like the symbol for nuclear power.
It does look a little bit like that, yes.
Yeah.
So this game is used to train... from what I understand, it's used to train people in government to war game out scenarios that may happen, right? Which is why this is some of these scenarios are so incredible.
Like if an orange populist were to somehow become president again.
Well, right. And when I went through these, I know obviously I just opened this box, but I have another one. The one that really jumped out at me is this thing called The Purple Disappeared.
The Purple Disappeared.
If you could read out what it says.
Swing states appear safe on the national electoral map in early polling. Later, it emerges that AI-driven election forecasts were wrong because the data scientists overlooked significant partisan differences that make swing states highly competitive. Discuss your response plan, then draw 2 injects. Real-world harm, it says at the bottom, misinformation/social bias, heightened stress, anxiety, and depression. What's social bias mean?
I have no idea, but that certainly sounds to me like they're asking the game players to come up with a plan for some kind of reaction to election results that don't necessarily square with what the polls were indicating, right? I mean, that's basically what they're saying in that scenario. Here's another one: mind games. An easy-to-use voice model helps create a viral video suggesting that one of the candidates may have dementia.
Suggested.
Discuss your response plan and draw 2 injects. So it's just full of stuff like this. And this, we started to hear about this idea that there were people in this information management / censorship / content moderation space that were deeply involved with, finding new ways to manage information that people see. Back in 2010, the Army actually got rid of the term PSYOP because they thought it had negative connotations. They brought it back in 2017 because there was a widespread belief that we have to engage in influence operations, that because Russia is already doing it, because China is already doing it, we need to do it. And it's the same thing
aimed at our own population.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We did this before. Previously, we created phony social media accounts in Arabic and Pashto, right? And that's something that we've understood. What's different is that they're now doing this in English, right? And they're now aiming this at domestic populations.
I thought that was illegal.
I would think it's illegal. I think a lot of this behavior is just unregulated, not looked at. I mean, who's going to go in and tell them they can't do this? What body is going? I mean, is it going to be
the New York Times, the Washington Post? Democracy dies in darkness. I mean, that is the role of the press.
Yes, but
to expose excesses and roll them back by exposing them.
But the problem is that they see, for instance, Donald Trump and the Trump movement as an extension of what they might call the Russian information ecosystem. They say, like the Global Engagement Center of the State Department has this concept of information ecosystem. So if you're too in alignment with Russian foreign policy views on, say, Ukraine or something like that, you can be part of the ecosystem even if you have nothing to do with that country. So the idea that, the first head of the Global Engagement Center is a former editor of Time magazine, Rick Stengel. He wrote a book called Information Wars that we all had to read when we were doing the Twitter files because we didn't know about this organization. Talked openly about how he thought the Trump campaign, he recognized the same techniques that he saw from ISIS and from Russia. So they see all of this as all part of a piece, and that is what I think is dangerous, is that we're sort of bringing the ethos of military counter messaging from the war on terror. We're bringing that home, and the enemy is now the domestic voter.
Right. Okay. So military messaging, but the purpose of the military is to kill people in the end and to deter war by the threat of killing people. But basically it's killing. That's their business.
Killing, yes, but also trying to discourage recruitment, right?
Of course, right.
Right.
Of course. But fundamentally, if you were to say, like, what's the purpose of military? It's to exert force, physical force. So if the U.S. military is turning its psyops on the country, like it's not that far, the nature of organizations and mission creep from there to like hurting people.
Exactly. And they actually, you'll find we found NATO papers that talked about how they found the American belief in inform, not influence, or truthfulness. That's part of an old NATO memo about influence operations, that you can't tell untruths. The more modern belief is that that's outdated, that because the Russians don't do that we have to, we shouldn't have those restraints. So we have to worry now about sort of phony influence operations in the United States. And if you look at it in things through that lens, suddenly things like Russiagate start to make a little bit more sense, right? Because you can imagine somebody in the intelligence services saying, well, Donald Trump is part of this nexus of anti-American forces, and anything's fair game against that kind of person.
So what Russia's central to all of this in the minds of the people doing it And from my perspective, as someone who's never been that interested in Russia, the country, you sort of wake up one day and, 25 years after the end of the Cold War and realize you're required to hate Russia. And I just refuse to go along with that on principle, not because I loved Russia. I do kind of like Russia, actually, having been there, but I didn't have any feelings about it a year ago.
Right.
But I'm an adult man and I don't want to be told what to think. And I'm not going to be, period, under any circumstances, because I'm not a slave. So, but unanswered is the question, like, why? Why is that a requirement of living in the United States, where I've lived my whole life, hating Russia? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, how do we get there, of all countries? What is this?
I don't understand that either. And also...
You don't?
I mean, especially compared to when Russia actually was a major... I mean, it wasn't nearly this intense in the 70s and 80s.
I was here. It was not.
Right?
Oh, of course not. In fact, people said, Russia was actually running actual psyops against the United States. AIDS was created at Fort Meade to kill black people. All these things. Like that was a Russian...
The active measures campaigns.
Big time. Mm-hmm. And of course, there were all these proxy wars going on even then in Mozambique. And there were like actual wars. And the prevailing view among people I knew was, Soviets are bad. Of course, no one's pro-Soviet in normal person world, but it would be kind of nice to be at peace. And nuclear war is really scary. And like, let's avoid that. That was the view that I remember as a child, right?
Sure. Yeah. We had Sting telling us the Russians love their children too.
Yeah, and which is true.
And, when Gorbachev came on the scene, I remember very distinctly people saying, that we have to find a way to get along with these people, like that we're spending too much money on defense, and that this is costing both of our societies. But that's not where we're at now. And oddly enough, the current American government, it feels a lot like the Soviet government of the early 80s, right? Where, Joe Biden would have fit in perfectly in the Politburo of the early...
He is Brezhnev. I've thought that many times.
Yeah. He's the doddering old, physically dead leader who still has a title because, he hasn't actually expired
Presiding over a decayed, cynical society that no longer believes in the slogans.
Right. The Russians have a joke where Gorbachev gets in a limousine. He's late for work, so he drives too fast. The cops pull him over, and Gorbachev's driver is drunk, passed out in the back. So he had to drive himself. He gets stopped by the police, and the cop sees him, salutes, goes back to the car, and the other cop says, "Who is that?" And he goes, "I don't know, but Gorbachev was his driver." And that's how you feel about America now. Who's running this country? Does anybody know?
Who is running the country?
Is it Jake Sullivan? You'd have to make a guess. Wouldn't you? Somebody has to have the final say about these things, and it can't be Biden. I just think that's a very weird thing to not know.
And no one seems curious about it either.
Right. Where are the stories about that? Who's that? Well, the Wall Street Journal just did a story about that.
I read it.
They broke the seal on that, but...
It's kind of a silly, dishonest story, but in it were quite a silly, dishonest story, I thought, but whatever. But there were certainly things in there that had not been in the Wall Street Journal or a big paper before, for sure.
Right. They took they dipped a toe in the lake of... Right, yeah. But still, in a real country, we would be scrambling to find out. Well, the president is clearly not capable. So what's going on, Nothing. There's not a hint of anything, which is just, it's so bizarre.
Well, and especially given the consequences. If this were 1995, you could sort of say it sort of runs on autopilot, and Tim Cook and the captains of industry can pitch in and sort of keep us on the track. That would be the view, right? But now we are on the brink. We're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis right now.
Right.
To total nuclear annihilation. And if the commander-in-chief is non-compos mentis, and the ship is listing, it's on its side, where are the people saying, I hate Trump, I love Biden? Politics don't even matter at this level. We're on the verge of nuclear war. That's not acceptable. Let's pull back. I have not even heard any person say that. What is that?
I don't know. Where's the public concern about that either? If this were 1986 2006.
Yes.
And we were at this level of antagonism with Russia. If there had been an exploded pipeline, if there was a shooting war in Ukraine, right, or some kind of proxy territory where our weapons were killing Russian troops and vice versa, because some of ours were over there too.
Quite a few,
and people would be panicking, right? Because at any minute, we're all relying on somebody like Putin being rational, which is already, I made that mistake in thinking that he would never invade Ukraine.
I thought that too.
And so, what are we banking on the idea that if we launch some kind of a weapon into the Russian territory, that they're not going to hit us?
What do you think?
I mean, I think the people who are prosecuting the conflict from our side, I'm very familiar with their mindset because I knew a lot of these folks when I was in Russia. They're not. It's kind of like all the president's men. These aren't very bright guys.
Yeah,
and things have gotten out of hand. And I think that they have no idea what they're doing, and this could easily get out of hand very, very quickly because they're messianic about this. They think they must continue this conflict. Whereas the one thing that I thought Barack Obama was sensible about was when the Crimea thing happened, he said, look, it's not, it's always going to be more important to them than it is to us.
That's right. Very important to them, by the way.
Right, exactly.
So I hear these people, including the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine but many others, just sort of blithely announce that, well, we're going to take Crimea. And that, again, I don't have strong feelings about Crimea. I've never been there, but I think I know as a factual matter that is a trigger for nuclear war right there.
For sure. And it's kind of a jump ball also, like, should that place be?
Well, I think it is Russian at this point, but
right, and it's been Russian historically. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff about Ukraine's history, like the fact that they created the territory as sort of on a whim, in the middle of the Soviet period. The lines are very arbitrary; they're not drawn along real linguistic or cultural lines. And if you've been to the place, you'll find that it's very Russian in some parts and very Ukrainian in others. I'm sure that's changing now, but the people who are pushing this, they have no knowledge of that whatsoever. It's the same thing as when I was in Russia. They've been told one thing, and so Ukraine to them is like Switzerland, and we're saving it from Russia. Whereas the reality is that it's nothing like that in reality. And I don't know, how dangerous do you think they are? I think they're crazy.
I think they're the most dangerous. I think they're seized by hubris. I think there is a messianic quality to this. I think the entire leadership class of the country is determined to commit suicide. I think that they've boxed themselves in. They're criminals. They know that they will be exposed as such. And they've also reached kind of the apogee of American empire anyway. It's all downhill from here. I do think that they feel this, and I think they want to extinguish the society. And that's such an incredibly dark thing to say. I hesitate even to say it, but I don't see a rational explanation for any of this behavior at all. I don't think it advances anyone's aims, including their own.
Right.
I don't believe that Larry Fink is like orchestrating all of this so BlackRock can get even richer. I think they want to get richer. I think Larry Fink's a bad guy, obviously. But I don't think it's...
Or Lockheed Martin.
That's exactly right. The defense contractors. That's all true on one level, but that's not the explanation.
No,
it's way deeper than that. I think this is a spiritual thing. And I do think societies kill themselves just as people do. And I think that's what clearly that's what we're seeing. I mean, tell me how that's not what we're seeing. And I think that's just such an ugly idea. Again, it hurts me to articulate it, but you asked, so that's what I honestly think.
Well, I mean, what other explanation is there?
Well, kind of, yeah.
Right? I mean, I've kind of run out of... I made the mistake, I think, for years of trying to think, well, what's the angle on this?
That's right. That's how I thought.
Like there's got to be some end game that they're going for. And the only way to make sense of this is to give that up, I think, because there's something darker going on in the culture of people who run this country that it's inaccessible if you're trying to like assign motives to it.